itself, like I say this all the time, right? The game moves too fast for you to live in the past. So I think, when we talk about being fully present in the moment and then seeing what's ahead, it's encouraging your kid to have that next play mindset.
Yep.
That the game is full of mistakes. It's gonna happen. Don't let it weigh you down. Flush it and then move on to the next play.
Okay, guys, today we welcome Marshall Cho, who not only is a coach I have a huge amount of respect for, but also a good friend of mine, and we've known each other for too long to even mention at this point because we'll age ourselves. But it's an honor to have you, Marshall. Obviously, you have been what I consider an ambassador of the game. You've traveled the world and coached at multiple levels, multiple camps all over the world. You were a very successful high school coach in Oregon, and obviously your most recent is coaching the world team in the Nike Summit game here in Portland, featuring the greatest high school players throughout the country and world, for that matter. And one of the things that I've always admired about you, watching your teams over the years and watching you coach, is the way that you are able to develop a particular culture that you want your players and your program to represent. And that has been something that I've always kind of stood at a distance and watched. Like, your players have always bought into the program. They've always bought into what you want to represent, not only on the basketball court, but just as a team and as a program in general. So I wanted to ask you kind of what are some of the key elements that you go through with your teams to create that kind of environment?
Well, no, thanks for the intro, Dave. Yeah, I'm honored to be here, kicking off your podcast series. Excited to see what you build from this. I've done a lot of these podcast interviews over the last, 5 to 10 years, I want to say. But this one in particular, I'm looking forward to, because when you ask questions like that, I do need to go back to the origin story, right? So for the listeners, Dave and our high school teammates, I remember when, I want to say you transferred in your sophomore year to Springfield High
Yes.
School
Yep.
in the early 90s.
Yep.
We're a year apart. For those who really want to know, Dave was our superstar player, and that was his junior, senior year at Springfield High, not to relive the old days, and that was the bench warmer. Sophomore and junior year, holding Dave's towel. I was really good at towel waving and being a good teammate. But really, like, when I think about anybody who's building culture, I think it starts with self-awareness. I think it comes back to being comfortable with who you are, knowing who you are. Even going back to my own high school journey, as I kind of kid about our journeys together, I was a bench warmer for most of my varsity career until my senior year. So not only did I get to see, players who excelled in their field, but I got to live the life of being a bench warmer for a good chunk of my career. I knew what it meant to wait your turn, but not just waiting, like really learning how to prepare for your time when your time comes. So that whole range of experience. The other unfortunate part of my high school journey was that I went through 3 different high school varsity coaches in a 4-year span. And so I come from a place of having that deep desire to have stability, right? Just even being an Asian American growing up in Springfield, Oregon, of all places. On one hand, I was so fortunate, to have almost grown up in an experience where I didn't experience a lot of outward racism, but at the same time, always questioning like my sense of belonging in the space, in the game. So when I think about my own desire to pursue those things, I think having empathy for 15 through 18-year-olds who don't know their place in the world quite yet, or even the ones who are outwardly confident, understanding that at the core of who they are, they're constantly searching for that, rock foundation. And so it all starts from there. I think, especially for the listeners, Dave was a parent. One of his sons, Mason, the one son you have, Mason,
Yep.
was we competed against. And so, I think you got to see, when you're talking about seeing and competing against a team that seems really cohesive, really bonded together. that's a scary thing to watch from an opposition, right?
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of that confidence, ironically, came from a place of, um, I wouldn't even say weakness, but a place of lacking. When I was growing up, that as a head coach, when I finally got my chance to build my own program and lead a group of young men, I had a lot of ideas on what I wanted out of, for my players from the place where I lacked from my own playing days. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, we have talked about like there's something about when you can get a particular identity or culture built in a team, how much more, I guess you can say, progress and development, which all leads to winning when everybody's buying into this. Sometimes with far less talent. Like,
Hmm.
you and I both, and I have witnessed you with some not the most talent loaded teams go in and have huge successful years. And seeing you
Yeah.
from, say, game 1 to game 15, just kind of like, man, everybody's buying in, everything is clicking, and all of a sudden you're sitting the top of the league, and there's 3 or 4 other teams out there that have a lot more talent on paper, but just the
Yeah.
fact that able to get the buy-in to what you
Yeah.
guys are doing can just, I mean, it just immensely increases the chances of success, as a team.
Yeah. I mean, I think the key word you mentioned there is identity. And again, I could keep coming back to this. As a 48-year-old father of two today, having spent 20 plus years coaching, 25 years in the classroom, about um, you know, I 25 years, I say, I've been out of the classroom for about 13 years, but so the first 10 to 12 years of my professional career was in the classroom as a teacher. Um, and so, I start there. I start as a person who's an educator first, seeking knowledge, thirsty for knowledge, trying to figure it out. And so, it's the same thing when I was in the classroom. I have a class of 30 students and I have a curriculum. I know I always begin with the end in mind. And so I take that approach when I'm coaching. I do have the end in mind. The part that's always neat is, you know, um, a coach-led team is good. Coach-led team can be pretty darn good, but a
Hmm.
player-led team is special, is
Yep.
exceptional, is different. And so, how do you give that sense of ownership and 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 that identity to the players so that they own it by the end of the year? I think some of the most successful teams I've had, I think it's a two-way street, because I've had teams who, maybe one or two leaders in the team aren't quite bought in and they're dealing with their own issues of trust and
Hmm.
and, and giving away that control. Um, but for the most part, when I try to model that first, hey, this is your team, this is your year. I get other years to coach. You only get a finite time to be a player representing a community. And I do believe that teams that own it, for themselves and you know, really like it starts with the buy-in first, the vision that you set as a coach. But beyond that, like there's in between from point A to point C there's a lot of turbulence. There's a lot of, I think really testing of your faith, if you will. And so those aren't the fun parts, for the most part. Like you do
For
write the
sure.
emotional up and downs of teenage boys, but even as a leader for me, I can't ride that same wavelength with the players. I have to, as an adult, really set the bar and say, this is where we're going to get to. Trust me, I've done it before. And then see if, the kids, can get to that point
Can
by the
dive
end of
in.
the season and be peaking. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. That kind of leads right into my next question of like, how do you foster that kind of leadership and buy-in from your players?
Yeah.
Typically that's a senior-led effort lots of times.
Yep.
And how do you build those to to basically make those guys leaders of what you're trying to do, especially like we said with the high school age groups.
Yeah. I think a lot of it, if when I really look back on it, sometimes, I say this a lot to my players in my early years that I leaned on, that I owe them a lot, that I was really fortunate to have strong leaders. Um, really by the year, and for the listeners, success isn't, success doesn't happen overnight. You can't achieve that overnight. It takes time. And for most high school coaches, I'd say, you really shouldn't judge a high school or college coach until year three. When you've given them a couple of years of identifying and fostering and pouring into the leaders that you want, exemplifying the culture. So for me, really, the first few years was a lot of just taking, ups and downs, taking our hits, taking our lumps. And by the time the third year rolled around is when we won our first league title. And
Yep.
at that point, before COVID hit, we were rolling. That was the first of three titles. And I remember two players in particular, Sean Elliott and J.R. Schilling, um, starting power forward and starting, wing small forward. These two guys, they were just so stable. They were just such rocks of the program. Um, really unselfish, parents who were also just bought in to what I was building.
Yep.
And I remember when we finally turned that corner, those two guys really did an amazing job of fostering. And a lot of this also comes from me in that, I come from, as a Korean American immigrant, I think bringing that identity and those values into my program was a really interesting experience. Being a head coach of a wealthy suburb in suburb of Portland, Oregon, and Lake Oswego, and so it taught me that it didn't matter your socioeconomic background, where you're coming from, the the values of an upperclassman taking care of the underclassmen. I think that's something that exists in high schools all across the country, but that's
Absolutely.
something as an immigrant having experience, we a collective, growing up in a collective society, like that came to me more naturally than others, and I knew that was a competitive advantage that I brought to the table by being authentic to who I am, right? So I really try to foster that with JR and Sean. Hey, you got to look out for your underclassmen. You're setting an example. You're leading, not just our high school program, but our youth program. And so as I was uplifting those guys and putting them on a pedestal for as role models for the rest of the city to see, they embraced it. They took care of the underclassmen coming. And what it started was now this brand new cycle of the players owning the program, them taking a sense of ownership in looking out for the underclassmen. And the underclassmen looking up and seeing that the true winners who are driven by humility, a sense of self, and sense of understanding that they're a part of something bigger than themselves,
Yep.
that allowed that culture to foster. And then from that point on, it just kind of took off. And really, my work, the heavy lifting was really done those first 3 years. But beyond that, it was, it made my job easier because I knew that ownership had really gone on to the players.
Yeah. Awesome. So let me ask you this, something I've always been curious, and now that we're, at the time that we're having a discussion, we're late September, teams are starting to prepare. But I've always been curious in a case like the Summit game where you're getting, 12 to 15 players from around the world. Some of them speak no English or don't speak the same language as each other. And you've got to put together a particular culture for one game where, with a bunch of guys that, are within the next year to 5 years of their lives, several are going to be lottery picks. How do you how do you do that in the short term? How do you preach kind of a, hey, we're not going to go out there and be individuals, we're going to be a team, in a setting like that in which you have such a short amount of time to work and you're dealing with just ultra talented players?
Yeah, so for the listeners who may not be familiar with this game, it's Nike Hoop Summit just celebrated their 25th year last year. And, historically, this is the game where you do talk about, like, when the beginning, there's a lot of foreign players who would come in that the American public didn't know much about at all. The Hoop Summit is the game where Dirk Nowitzki's coming out party was, right? He came
Mm-hmm.
from Germany, and everybody was like, "Who's this guy?" And he actually
So
led the team
funny,
to the
like no
victory.
idea, like who is this
No
guy? I
idea who's
remember
Dirk.
that well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Tony Parker was another one.
Yep.
More in more recent years, there's a lot of clips of Nikola Jokic being interviewed in this Hoop
Yeah.
Summit logo practice jersey, and he had a bad week of practice and really didn't perform that well in the game itself.
Yeah.
And now he's the
And look at him
top
now,
three
right?
best player in
Yep.
the world. Yeah. So there's been an evolution. So a couple things. Last year I got to coach as the head coach. And I mean, honestly, the world we live in now, it reminds you how the basketball can bring things so small, into a small space. But everybody who spoke, who came in from overseas spoke English. So the
Good.
language wasn't so much of an issue. It's top 12 players in the world versus top 12 U.S. seniors. Um, and so you're right, we get a week of practice. It's two a days, a morning practice, evening practice. And the luxury that I did have was I got to be involved with the game for about 10 years on the USA side.
Mm-hmm.
So, professionally, it's been one of my greatest honors. Like, and Dave, you know this better than anybody. Like, if you growing up together, in Springfield, if you would have said that, your teammate is, representing our state, in our city, to the rest of the world as a head coach, you'd say like,
Yeah.
get out of here. Like, what's happening here? But
Yep.
um, you know, I did get to see that the culture that USA Basketball builds. Also, like, I wouldn't say over a week of time, but we used to have the October mini camps for a weekend where the
Mm-hmm.
best seniors to freshmen are in the gym together, about 80 of them working out together. I've been involved with the Final Four camp, which again brings the best freshmen through juniors in the country. You work together. I've got to see the firsthand, like the U.S. team. They have a slight bit of disadvantage in which they, circumvented with all these mini camps that they do throughout the
Yeah.
year. But
Yep.
really, the seniors come in on a Wednesday and then they play the game on Saturday versus the world team comes in on Sunday. So we get about six more practices. But I
Good.
got to see all the great high school coaches in the country try to get them to buy into something bigger than themselves. And obviously, if you're representing the United States, that's like, that goes without saying. Like, you can point to the Olympic team and say, hey, look, like the NBA All Stars, the Jason Tatums of the world are sacrificing their
Yep.
minutes. This is a game that actually matters. It's not the
Yep.
McDonald's All American game. It's not the Jordan Brand Classic. Like, they keep track of who wins and loses. So there's already tremendous pride built in that. So now on the flip side, I come over to the world side and I have to replicate. I know that if I'm competing against the gold standards of USA basketball, it's the same thing you just mentioned, you know, as a Westland parent, seeing a Lake Oswego team that's cohesive and knowing as a basketball person, not a parent, like you're a basketball person, seeing it and go, uh-oh, like this is a David versus Goliath situation where David
Yeah.
doesn't look the part is going to win the game.
Yep.
And so in that same sense, like that's what I try to bring to the table with the world team. Um,
Nice.
being an immigrant, knowing that a lot of these players are going to be immigrants at the ages of 19, 20,
Yep.
coming over to the U.S. to live for the first time, to experience the culture shock, to experience the day-to-day grind of being a professional basketball player. On some levels, I feel like I was built for this job because I know what that looks like to come into a country as a stranger and to find their place and footing in the world. So, um, it was a tremendous honor to do that. We had some players such as Kama Malawach, who will be a lottery pick. He's going to compete as a freshman at Duke this year. VJ Edgecombe, who had already been in the States for a couple of years, playing at a prep school in Long Island, coming from the Bahamas,
Yep.
leaving his
Yep.
family behind. So in that sense, like I resonated with a lot of these guys, and I felt that if anything that I felt the pressure, it wasn't about the game day. It was about making sure that the whole week of practices allowed them to feel like that their first step into the U.S. was something of, that symbolized, the welcoming spirit of our country, the opportunities that it has to give, and the work that it's going to take to succeed and make a name for
Awesome.
yourself here.
Yep. Awesome. It was fun to watch. I personally came and watched a couple practices and just it was funny. I think that the first time I came was your second or third practice of the week, and it had looked like you guys had been practicing for 4 months. Guys running through drills and everything very cohesive and for each other, and even in the scrimmage
Yeah.
situations. Um, it was a lot of fun. So that was a good experience. I'm glad you got that opportunity, and as a friend of yours, it was awesome to see you actually
No,
get that role after a
no,
patient process and putting in your dues. It was awesome to see.
I appreciate that.
So shifting gears a little
You
bit.
say,
So go ahead.
yeah, no, just before you shift gears, I think when you say that, such a compliment, so that's something like most people have a hard time accepting, right? But like again, coming from an old friend who's known me for a long time, know what I'm about, it means a lot. But it also makes me think about like if it was going that well, it's a credit to the fact that the players again were so bought in and locked in. So whatever the first speech I gave, like that sets a tone, right? But again, the rest of it, the players have to own it. So the players were phenomenal all week. And then I think about the assistant coaches. Like I delegated a ton. So if you're talking
Good.
about
Yeah.
making sure that a practice looks like a well-oiled machine, just like I'm talking about putting the trust in the players to own it, your assistant
Your
coaches have to
coaches.
be totally bought in. And I
100%.
had a phenomenal staff. Typically, they only give you two assistant coaches officially on paper, but I think the inclusive, I think
Yep.
the person who experienced inclusion as an immigrant coming to the Springfield, Oregon, of all places, my job is to my true job is to pass that forward to the next group that I come in
Yep.
contact with, right? So I made sure that like there were three or four other coaches who were in similar situations as me over the years with USA Basketball, not really being given the official title, but given the workload to feel like they contributed to something.
Yeah.
So, when you saw our practice, I mean, essentially I had like six assistant coaches, like a
Yeah.
college team or an NBA team on there. So that's what allowed the practice to look the way it did. We
Good.
were very successful in terms of getting feedback from NBA executives and personnel who said that, these were some of the most well-run practices. And
Awesome.
I own it. I'm proud of that
Yeah.
because I've seen it. I've seen what to do, what not to do. And to see the assistant coaches and the players just buy into it was a phenomenal experience.
Good. That's awesome. Yeah, it showed, and that's especially when you can get the guys at the highest level giving you some of those compliments from the NBA level and stuff and what they're looking for. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I kind of want to shift into kind of the state of our game that we love and play and coach, and trying to build up young athletes. And I kind of wanted to get your perspective on what has changed or evolved because you've been involved at the highest level, of some of these younger athletes in particular on their journeys to get into the pro level. What have you seen that has changed in the last few years, and how it's evolved with youth and high school level sports or basketball in general?
I mean, the biggest thing obviously is the name, image, and likeness, NIL, opportunities that are available to families and young players. I think there is a trickle down effect to that. A lot of these shoe companies and corporations are also putting a premium on brands such as the EYBL, which Nike is pushing,
Mm-hmm.
but other companies too. That the involvement of the shoe companies has been existing forever, but I think agencies are getting involved now. Agents and runners are more prominent, involved, and they don't have to be kind of in the back stages or doing their work from behind the scenes. How does that affect those of us working with youth players in the local neighborhood and whatnot? I don't think that's trickled down yet, but you know what I do see is a lot of I think between all the recent years of the money kind of coming to the surface of it, but
Yeah.
also social media having such a huge grip
Yeah.
on our kids. So if you look at kids who are sixth grade, they're paying attention to what Overtime, social media content, creators such as Overtime or Made Hoops who
Yeah.
run their leagues and and tournaments and showcase events. I mean, everybody has a camera. Everybody gets to tell. On
Yeah.
one hand, I think it's a blessing that you do have control over your own storytelling mechanisms, but on the other hand, like there's something to be said about doing the work behind the scenes, failing forward,
Yeah.
which one we want our kids to do without having a camera in their face.
Yeah.
So I think there's just a lot of combination of things that, if anything, it gets back to our conversation about what you saw me doing approximately 10 years ago, running a high school program and building it from a place of authenticity, a place of having the pillars of courage and presence and
Yeah.
trust. These words that we want our kids to carry forward with their lives when they leave the basketball courts. So I think more than ever, it, it's the battle is to remind kids their value, their worth, that comes outside of the sport, and
Yep.
that we play. On one hand, it's a game that celebrates individuals and individual play, but at the end of the day, you win games and you win championships, you win titles with four other guys on the floor with you.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of our game. But I think it's definitely coming under attack in terms of the distractions
Yeah.
that come the way of our, whether it's our elite players all the way down to the local players that playing on their high school varsity
Yeah.
programs.
So what do you tell parents that need to, you know, support their child's basketball journey without kind of succumbing to that type of pressure, especially now, like as you mentioned with the NIL stuff, like we're talking life changing money.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and when there is that kind of pressure to perform, especially if you're raising a talented kid in the sport, how do what advice could you give to a parent to not feel that kind of pressure, to maybe to not create the undue pressure to to perform and get an NIL deal or whatever it may be? What kind of advice could you give to parents?
That's a hard one. The only advice, honestly, I can give is the one I give myself as a parent. Like right now, I have a 14-year-old son who's a freshman in high school. Um, the only thing I found myself telling him is like, enjoy the process. This is for you. You own it. The growth, that you experience is a direct result of the focus that you put into consistent work every day. You know, now that's my own son who's not collecting NIL offers anytime soon, right? But let's say he gets to that point, right? Like, should any of that change? Like, I hopefully not. I think it takes me back to, about 5 or 6 years ago. I was at the one of the USA basketball mini camps, and again, this is before the NIL time. So, but the pressure to hold on to that number one ranking or whatever the outside world puts on you is
Yeah.
tremendous.
Yeah.
And I remember one mother in particular, she was at the camp. Her son was a sophomore, number one player in the country. And you could tell she was filled with anxiety. And she was talking to the junior national team director about, hey, we're being told this advice from our trainers, this from an
Mm-hmm.
AAU team. And they're getting pulled into all sorts of different directions. And I'll never forget, this is like one of the most impactful things I've seen in my life. And my friend, who was the junior national team director at the time, said it to the mother, looked her straight in the eye and said, listen, mom, like, your son is who he is because you gave birth to him. Like,
Very
all
true.
this
Good point,
outside
right?
noise, like,
Yeah.
okay, that's great. Like, you sit on that and you have some opportunities to measure and weigh and, try to figure it out.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, mom, like, your gut instincts has to tell you your son is special because you gave birth to him. The DNA and the genetics and the gifts that your son possesses comes from you.
Yeah.
And it was a really validating moment for me to see a professional acknowledge and validate the mother first, and
Yeah.
just basically saying,
Absolutely
take a deep
huge.
breath, trust your gut instincts. He's gotten this far because of you. And, moving forward, I don't know what decision this family may have made, but it was really about, like, then if that's your family, like, be careful who you let into your inner circle.
Yeah.
You know, do your
Very true.
homework, make sure that the people are of record, character, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So, coming back to like a concrete advice I would give is like, take your time committing to a group of people that you let into your circle. Do your research, pay attention to what the streets say about those people, and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
keep them moving forward that way.
Yeah. Because people, especially when talent starts showing up, people try to sneak in to be a part of it. And like you said, you've got to be careful and keep that inner circle small. Absolutely.
Sure.
I've seen too many cases where it's too big and bad things can happen. Um,
Hmm.
so great advice. Great advice. So now that we're kind of in this environment now that I don't think is going to change much when it comes to mental performance, and that kind of being a key element of mental health. I have particular taken an interest in this kind of topic, just going through some stuff personally and having been involved in the youth basketball side for so many years, and seeing confidence being shattered and broken over little things and all the kind of stuff, it's really kind of sparked an interest in my in my path helping athletes. So I wanted to ask you, like, what, as players are beginning to prepare for their season, what are some, key mental aspects that you think would benefit these players and even these parents to getting ready to start their season? What are some of the things that you could point out, like what kind of things from a mental perspective should they be focusing on as they prepare for their season?
I mean, two things come to mind. First of all, if you have the anxiety that a lot of parents are going to feel, it comes from the lack of proper preparation. I think just like we talked about earlier, just being mindful of who you let into your circle, like be mindful of what you're consuming,
Yep.
and to feeding your mind. And it even comes back to like, you know, you can consume, highlight reels, but are you consuming like the the drills and the work, the daily deposits that you make into growing your game and giving yourself confidence, like that's not the flashy stuff.
Yep.
So first of all, I think this time of the year, as the tryouts come close, like if you haven't been intentionally putting that in since April when the season ended, you are going to feel anxiety. You are going to feel some sense of nervousness because you haven't prepared properly, right?
Very true.
So I'm
Yep.
big on like in the off season, like be mindful of how many games you're playing and be mindful of like what kind of games it is. Be mindful of like chasing the cloud, as the as the
Yeah.
kids say. Like don't do that. Like like let your confidence come from a true place of like a rock solid foundation of knowing that you worked on the fundamentals that's necessary to give you an edge. When you're
Yep.
competing. So that's number one. But let's say you're in a situation where maybe you've gone through that ups and downs and you haven't been as consistent. Now the team time's coming and you are getting nervous. Like what can you do? Um, what I find myself doing with young players right now is um, at this point just giving them a lot of reps in game situations. I know you're a big proponent of the 3-on-3, leagues and playing a lot of that small sided games where you're getting a lot of reps, right?
Yep.
And what I would say, the mental health piece of it, or the mental, like the strength component of it, is, you know, at the end of the day, if you're trying to do something that you're not, you're gonna fail. Like I think number one, like that's just accepting that is huge.
Yep.
So I found myself like pick one or two things that you're really good at and focus on those. If you're a big body, you might be a heavy-footed player, but you can set really good screens. Like focus on that and
Yeah.
find success in that. Start what we say is star in your role to expand your role, right? And I think just that truthful conversation to have with coaches who've seen the game and seeing where your child can have success is huge. I,
Yep.
I think a lot of anxiety and struggle comes when an individual tries to do something that they're not within a team setting. And so it's funny, like I don't have a crystal ball answer to say like this is what you do to deal with like anxiety, but I think finding the right lane for yourself and embracing the role that you have in that moment and being fully present and engaged in it is the best thing you can do for your mental health. And then the last thing, in terms of the actual game itself, like I say this all the time, like the game moves too fast for you to live in the past. So I think, when we talk about being fully present in the moment and then seeing what's ahead, it's encouraging your kid to have that next play mindset.
Yep.
That the game is full of mistakes. It's gonna happen. Don't let it weigh you down. Flush it and then move on to the next play. Um, I think the more, and again, parents might be watching this and saying easier said than done, Coach Cho. But I
Hmm.
think with anything, that the more reps you get in that, I think it helps kids to, that in itself, being able to be in a safe environment where you make a lot of mistakes and the game
Yep.
doesn't wait for you and you have to move on to the next play. That habit of moving on to the next play is a skill set that's really underemphasized in our game and development in our youth
Absolutely.
sports today.
Yep. Yeah, great stuff. The present moment focus, as you said, as hard as it is to do, as long as you have some keys or whatever the process may be to get back to that present moment, is absolutely a game changer. I've seen, especially
Yeah,
players going through adversity, players trying to improve, players fighting through injury. It just really
yeah,
changes everything. I can
yeah,
remember, gosh, 10 or 12 years ago now, I was up in Spokane for a charity event, and I had the privilege of sitting with Kyle Korver, like one of the best
mm,
shooters in NBA history, for about 30 minutes. And I
yeah,
just wanted to pick his brain. Like, how
yeah,
does a shooter, how does a shooter like that maintain that level of confidence and maintain that level of ability? And he goes through all the process of kind of the reps and the practice. That's where a lot of your confidence comes, knowing that you've shot 2,000 shots this week and that, you're
yeah,
prepared. But the
yeah,
biggest thing he said to me, which is a present moment thing, was he said, and I'll quote it basically word. I think I wrote it down later that night when I got back to my hotel. He said, "And I have the ability to forget." And
yeah,
I went, "Huh? What is that?" And then I thought, like, well, can you expand on that a little bit? He's like, "I don't think for a second after a missed shot. I just forget it. If it
yeah,
was, I don't think for a second about it." And he's
yeah,
right in that present moment. And I started to think, like, man, that when you start thinking about the greatest shooters, and especially at the NBA level, which is funny to me because, like, you'll have some shooters go 5 for 15, 5 for 20, and they'll just keep firing away because it's in their rhythm. They have confidence and they just have the ability to forget. They aren't dwelling on misses. They aren't dwelling on mistakes, and they're constantly in the present moment. And I remember when Kyle said that, it kind of a light bulb went off about, yeah, just the ability to forget really can change a play, especially a youth player, a high school player, can really change their entire performance.
yeah,
We've all had those players, obviously, that, gosh, if they have a turnover or two or they miss a shot or two right out of the gates, it's going to be a real long game for them. And we just
mm,
know that.
yep,
And that's kind of one of those things, just not being able to forget, not being able to move on, and not staying in the present moment, like you mentioned.
yep, 100%.
So one of the last things I want to touch base with on the mental performance piece is how, from a parental standpoint to your child, or if you're a parent of a child, no matter what their level may be, no matter what grade, or whether the number one kid on the team or the number 10 kid on the team, what can a parent do to to try to help their kid on the mental performance side without, of course, being an expert on it? Like, what are some tips that parents can help their young child with? Because sometimes as a parent, you and I both coaching our own kids, sometimes it
Hmm.
just naturally falls on a deaf ear. It just does. I don't need to hear it
Yep,
from dad. And
yeah,
my son in particular, I coached him all through youth, and you could see sometimes where he was seeing me as dad, but he'd go off and do something else another coach would mention, and that's part of
yeah,
the growing process, and everybody gets that. So
yeah.
as a parent, what are some tips you think that you could share with your kid on staying present and staying in the right frame of mind?
I mean, first of all, I don't know if this is the theme of the day, but it takes a village to raise a child, right? So
True.
again, I think I'm catching myself saying the same thing over and over again in terms of, like, when you highlighted the success of our practice that I had delegated to the assistant coaches. I had players who were bought it. I didn't even mention the support staff, all the student manager type people who are wiping the
Mm.
floor, getting the film ready, and all of that. So it takes a whole village. And so first of all, just you and I both lived it. I think I'm a pretty accomplished coach, but also, like, I'm a dad first, and to my child who plays basketball, I'm his dad. Like, I'm not his coach, right? So
Yep.
I accept the fact that, having been that person who was on the receiving end of thousands of dads who would say, come to me and say, Coach Cho, would you say this to my son? Because he'll
Yeah.
hear it from you, but he won't listen to me.
I get the
Like,
same. Yep.
now that role's reversing, and I'm like, I'm embracing that. So
Yeah.
I am constantly on the hunt for men of high character that I've observed, of high values, work ethic. And I identify those people and I get my son in front of them. That's like number one. That's made my
Yeah.
life so much easier. I have assistant coaches, such as Rob Smaller, who was my right hand man at Lake Oswego for 8 years, and now he's leading his own program at a flagship program at Jefferson High School in the city. So I have people like that I send my son to and I trust, wholeheartedly.
Yep.
Now on the flip side of that, when I do get to be the dad, like I really try not to focus on the basketball piece of it, the X's and O's, and that'll come naturally if he has questions for me. When those moments come, I'm I grab it as, as long as I can and
Yeah.
let that moment stretch so we can
Yeah.
enjoy that X's and O's back and forth. But majority of our conversation, I find myself as a dad, I'm trying to point to like, were you a good teammate? Did you have fun today? Did you try your best? Did you follow instructions? I think if those things that my son could say yes to out of a particular workout or a class or a lecture, um, I want him to experience those every day,
Yeah.
and
It's a
that's it.
win. Yep.
It's a win. I think about this, this morning, just not to make it too personal, but my mom's, been on a stage 4 breast cancer fight for 10 years.
Yeah.
She's probably in her last chapters of fighting it. We were given 2 to 10 years, and it's been 10 years and 9 months. So, I come from this not just as a father, but I come from this as a son who's benefited
Hmm.
from a mother and father who really try to pass on the values of humility, values of sacrifice to me.
Yep.
So I keep that in mind, as I'm passing it forward to my son and daughter, that really it's in the particular raising a son who plays basketball, that I'm always going to be a father first. And the things that I'm trying to pass down to him is the same kind of sacrificial love that I received from my mother, you know. And so that's, I found success in that. I feel like my son's trying to start to find success in it himself.
Great.
And I constantly get asked, "Hey, would you be interested in joining our coaching staff? To
Yeah.
help?" And I'm like, the last thing I want to be is coaching my son, unless it's in an organic situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such a good note, especially, we're all thinking about and praying about your mom and your family, of course. And I think as a parent, and you and I can both, I'm sure they would be able to say this, and especially you and I being kind of coaches, the time goes so fast. And I
So
can think
fast,
of
yeah.
so many moments with both my daughter, who's now approaching her mid 20s, my son, who's in his early 20s and still playing, of so many moments I look back on and I as a parent took so serious or maybe got a little hard on them for a performance.
Hmm.
Instead, looking at it from a standpoint of, you know what, this time goes by so fast that I really just want to dive in and enjoy these moments and
Hmm.
understand that when adversity hits or maybe there's something going on, that these are periods of growth for my child. They're not something for me as a parent to flip out about, to get angry about, to put more pressure on my kid, but really just enjoy the process of growing and watching my kid perform. I feel I scored about a B plus on that, but looking back, I could have had a A plus. And like I said, now my son in particular has had 2 ACL surgeries and missed a lot of time, and really just think about
Yeah.
like perspective wise, like guy,
Yep.
those times at 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 years old, just love that the kids out there playing and working hard
That's
and
it.
all, and yeah, enjoy all the benefits that sports brings our young men and women, and just love every minute of it. And it goes
Yep.
by so fast, as we know. So,
Yep.
Marshall, I really, really appreciate your time. Can you take us out with one more thought here on anything you want to discuss over the topics that we've covered today as we get ready for another basketball season right around the corner?
Um, I just think that the thing that's in my heart today is urgency. Like, if you you have an opportunity to tell somebody that you appreciate them and you love them, like don't wait. Send that text, make that call, send an email, write a card. I think for me the biggest thing right now is like showing gratitude for all the blessings that I've been able to have, and being mindful of passing that forward to the people that are in my circle. Um, to bring it full circle to the Hoop Summit game, I had a conversation with a young man, Honorable Tang, whose parents immigrated from Ghana, but Honor himself was born in the U.S. and he's somebody I actually had an opportunity to work with on the USA basketball side before, when he was an underclassman. And Honor and I were trying, to kind of reconnect and talk right before I was addressing the team. And I was trying to figure out like what to set the tone for the week with. And the fact that his name is spelled Annor, but like you say it like Honor.
Honor.
And
Yeah.
he was just talking about like what he wanted to do in that week, because he's he's an All-American. He's
Yep.
basketball wise, he's accomplished everything he wants to accomplish, and this is just one game. So what did you want to do with that week? And for him choosing into the world team, even though he's an American citizen, holds an American passport, he made that intentional choice to honor his parents and their sacrifice coming over from Ghana.
Yeah.
And
Huge.
so it was such a powerful moment for me to have with this young man who was so impressive. And so when I went into it with all these players from the Bahamas, from Lithuania, from China, all over the world, that's what I asked them. I said, who do you want to honor this week? And how are you going to go about doing that? Are you going to go about doing that slacking off? Are you going to go about, doing that being a selfish player? Or are you going to go about... So everything that we wanted to encapsulate as a value for the world team, for the Hoop Summit squad, it came back from our desire and wanting to honor those who, came before us, made the
Yep.
sacrifice so that we can live out the dreams that we're having. So um, whether it's on that scale of the best team in the world for a week, or
Yeah.
if it's your son or daughter who's playing in the local sixth grade tournament coming up, like I think when we step back and think about all the people who have poured into ourselves, into our journeys positively, we have that responsibility to honor them by pressing it forward.
Yep. Awesome. Awesome stuff. Well, Marshall, we appreciate it. We look forward, especially me, to your ongoing contributions to the game. You're a true ambassador, and I love watching it from a distance and being any part of it that I can. And appreciate you coming on here, sharing your thoughts and wisdom and thoughts on these topics as we try to kind of change the game internally and give some people some tools that they don't always think about. Like, we can always teach somebody how to jump stop or jab step and work on shooting, but some of these things we talked about today are a little bigger picture thing that not only go into sports and basketball but also life. And I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing your thoughts, and we'll do it again sometime in the near future.
Sounds good. It was an honor to be with you. Appreciate you, brother, and wish you the best of luck in this new venture.
Yep. Thanks, bud. We'll talk soon.